Hello, welcome to News Uncut. I'm Gary Chappell, and today I'm joined by one of the strongest voices of common sense during the madness of COVID, and someone who was a fellow of the College of American Pathologists for more than 40 years, Dr. Roger Hodkinson. Roger, thanks for coming on. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm I have a bit of a cold, so I apologize for my coughing. But for everyone listening, having the odd cold's a good thing. I don't give a damn whether it's COVID or not. It tweaks your immune system and it makes you live longer.
Absolutely. Roger, if I could start by taking you back to November the 13th, 2020, and there was a comment that you gave back then to the Edmonton, Canada City Council, and you said that COVID was the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public, and that COVID was no worse than a bad flu. Knowing what we know now, how do you feel about those statements? Do you feel vindicated, or do you feel angry that there are still governments, medical professionals, and mainstream media still pushing the original story?
Well, two separate questions. I feel both vindicated and bloody angry.
Mm.
Um, because the evidence is now overwhelming. What I said then was actually an understatement. It never was even a pandemic. Um, and it certainly did not warrant any, I underlined, of the interventions, whether it's the mandates or the so-called vaccine.
Since that time, what has happened to you since then? How much pushback have you
Um,
received?
well, you started off by recognizing that I was a fellow of the, um, uh, I'm just trying to turn the volume up here, beg your
Mm.
pardon. Um, Yes, I was a fellow of the American College of Pathologists. Rather proud of that, actually. For 40 years, I kept my nose clean, did everything that you could expect for a traditional doc, and then they decided. Actually, it was while I was in Ottawa with the truckers. They decided to can me, and there was a rather short interview, which went something like this. They tried to read the rap sheet. I said, I know all of that. I know what you're accusing me of. You're trying to intimidate me, aren't you? To which they said, Oh, Dr. Hodkinson, not at all. You misunderstand. I said, No, you know damn well you are. You know damn well you are. And while I was looking him straight in the eyes, five of them, I said, You should be ashamed of yourselves. Click. I disconnected them. I knew I was going to be executed, so what's the point in having a conversation?
No, absolutely.
So that's no, that's one thing. I'm in the business world. I'm a medical entrepreneur. One of the businesses I run has used to have a large customer base with insurance companies.
Mm.
And I'm hated, to put it mildly, in the C-suite of insurance companies. And so that's had a devastating effect on me, just like it has on many people involved in COVID, and I'm not putting myself up as a paragon of virtue here. I'm just saying I've got the scars too. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a brutal time, but things are changing. And I look forward to the person holding the basket when heads roll.
Absolutely. I mean, just talking to that further, I know that you've described the COVID affair as the big kill, and also that you want people to be jailed. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, it comes a point when it's actually murder,
Mm.
when the evidence is so overwhelming. And the authorities, so-called, are fully aware of that privately, and yet they continue doing the same thing. It might have been okay initially to have been just swept along with the international hysteria, lack of due diligence, etc. But even the Pfizer clinical trial killed 1,200 people right from the get-go.
Mm.
That was public information. And any drug historically that kills 50 people in a clinical trial gets the kibosh. So the evidence is for murder is overwhelming. And that's the kind of thing you should go to jail for. A lot of people should go to jail for who were directing traffic at the highest level.
Mm. So why isn't anything happening with regard to that? You mentioned about the trial data showing how many deaths. The millions of people have died worldwide from this vaccine. Why has there been no accountability, do you think?
I think you have to go back to the origin of this and how it did sweep the world. Uh, First of all, of course, it never was a pandemic. That word is used far too loosely. A pandemic is an international spread of a pathogen that kills a lot of people. Well, excuse me, knock knock, this one didn't. There was no excess mortality in the first year before the vax came out.
Mm.
And the hospitals were empty, with a singular exception of Britain and New York. Britain, where they were killing people by the thousands with remdesivir, and New York, where they were killing thousands with the ventilator abuse. The rest of the world escaped unscathed. It never was a pandemic. It just didn't kill enough people. And for that reason, of course, it was a lousy bioweapon. All these people that think this is, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a hardcore, traditional, well-trained, head screwed on doc. Okay, uh, this this never was genocide. It just didn't kill enough people. What it was the result of gain of function research, which we can talk about later, that escaped, and there was then put into action a uh, pre-designed plan by the military to trial run how we would react to a real bioweapon. This, everyone must understand that this in its entirety was a military operation, which was designed to test reaction and how to control the public, control the media for messaging, which would all be terribly important if, in fact, some rogue country were to develop a serious bioweapon.
So, just sorry to interrupt. You said that it wasn't? It was leaked. There was a leak. Was it an accidental leak, or was it released on purpose for the purpose of testing how it works for a real life bioweapon?
I doubt very much that it was intentional. Um, but the plan was on the shelf for DoD in the States to immediately operate all the elements of mandates and and the vaccine that was in the wings. You see, this let's role play for a second
Mm.
here, Gary. Let's imagine you're Fauci and I'm Trump, right? And Trump, of course, was a failed little man, a Lilliputian that had never achieved anything. He was looking for glory at the end of his career, initially with an HIV vaccine that failed, of course. And along comes COVID. Well, Fauci knew that the DoD and also researchers with published work, um, he knew that the lipid nanoparticles were a perfected technology.
Mm.
It had failed in its therapeutic applications for brain cancer. It was actually killing people. It was known to be an effective delivery vehicle for something. And all you had to do was package it with in this case, mRNA of the COVID vaccine. And so that could be done very quickly. Um, so the conversation would have gone something like this. Hey, Don, you know what? We can lick this thing real quick. Um, we've got the technology ready and waiting. I guess within 6 months we could have a vaccine that would be very effective. And Trump would have said in his classic style, if we were a fly on the wall, "You're kidding, Tony. You're kidding. Let's do it." Boom, just like that, just like that. And so you had the failed Lilliputian with all the money pitching to a narcissist. And by the way, I'm a Trumper, okay?
Okay.
What was he wrong on that? Absolutely. He got sucked in because he didn't know a damn thing about medicine, but Fauci did. And that's really how that started. And then it was Fauci was the stooge, the front end stooge. It was the military operation was run by Birx, who was conveniently always in the background, but always in the pictures. She ran it. She ran it like a military operation. The development of the vaccine, the money for it, the distribution of it. It was a test run for how do we react to a real bio threat. It appeared suddenly as an opportunity for the DoD to go full bore into a trial reaction to what might happen. And then, of course, it got out of control because it was premature, as we all know, to release such an untested product with a new technology.
Yeah.
And sadly, the rest is history. Once that genie got out of the bottle, everyone copied. Most ministries, if not all, internationally, regardless of which country you're in, they just don't have the in-house expertise to judge merits of these things and to assess the effects. They just don't have the brain power, the expertise. And so it became basically the reason why, of course, everything is done everywhere, generally speaking, quite apart from COVID. Everyone else is doing it. So it must be right. Don't trouble me with due diligence and the money required for that. Let's just do it. I mean, this is an emergency, isn't it? And everyone's doing it. So
Yeah.
we'll do it. And no one connected the neurons.
But surely there's enough evidence of, excess deaths, myocarditis, strokes, things like that now to be able to connect those neurons. Why is there a refusal, or why do you think that there is still a refusal to say, yes, it was the
Well,
RNA jabs?
they've ignored the number one rule of public relations. The number one rule is, as for example, the Tylenol poisoning episode, the number one rule is fess up when you screw up.
Mm.
Fess up immediately. Do it contritely without a teleprompter. Do all the right things immediately when it's so obvious. And guess what? People will forgive you.
Mm.
They will forgive you. And actually, your star might rise. That's the number one rule of a PR. But of course, politics doesn't follow that rule.
No.
They back themselves into a corner and they cannot and will not say, do the big mea culpa. So I think it just got worse and worse, and the more they dug themselves in. And here we are today with 5 years on, the most ridiculous reactions are still happening. In my own province of Alberta here, we're still vaccinating children as young as 6 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I will still have stories of people getting texts from their local GP about getting jabs, people that don't need them, like you say, children. And what is the obsession with it? I mean, even today, I see stories from people such as Bill Gates and the EU boss, Ursula von der Leyen, about wanting to vaccinate 500 million children by 2030. What is the obsession with these stories about jabbing so many people in such a short time limit?
Well, It's three things operating simultaneously. I like alliterations. It's gigantium greed. It's Machiavellian manipulation. And it's stupendous stupidity, all acting at the same time. But I think the money side is the biggest one of the three. Um, Gates is an idiot when it comes to anything to do with mRNA vaccines, just like Larry Ellison, the Stargate guy who thinks he can throw billions at this and at cancer and get a vaccine. I mean, it's dreaming in Technicolor. Um, no, those are, I think, were the three things that were going on simultaneously that all reinforced each other, backed by a resolute determination to control the public.
Yeah, do you think that that talks to a bigger picture of what's going on in terms of changing the way the world works and how it is controlled? Do you think this is the first steps of edging towards that kind of new political system?
I don't think that was the original intent, but it certainly whetted the appetite for um, people in authority to understand that they can, if they apply all the levers, control the public very effectively. All you had to do was look out of the window in a ministry and see the people walking along the street, all like lemmings wearing masks. And we got them.
Yeah.
We got them. And that was, but the wonderful, I hate to say this, look, I'm a physician. I understand the value of every life, every single life. But a wonderful thing came out of COVID. And if COVID had not happened, we wouldn't have realized this. The wonderful thing that came out of COVID was precisely what we just talked about, was the awareness now of the power of government to control, the corruption of every single institution of relevance, whether it's medicine, law, the media, you name it. We now see the corruption that is so pervasive in all those organizations, which we were previously unaware of. I was unaware of. I didn't realize that the medical journals were corrupt because of the all the advertising which has bought control of the content, just like Big Pharma in the States controls the mainstream media because of all the money they pour into advertising. You'd like to think that Big Pharma would be very upset about being forced to pay money to roll out all the rare complications of drug X to the general public as absolutely pointless and total waste of money. You'd like to think that that's so bloody obvious, wouldn't you? No, they went gladly into that regulation because they knew that the flip side was we can control content.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the revelations have been enormous in all the institutions, and it's for that reason that I think there's hope for society because we now know who the enemy is.
Yeah, I guess if there was one good thing about it, like you say, it's woken up a lot of people. Although frustratingly, and I don't know whether you find this, there are still far too many people that you would
Yeah.
be deemed as asleep. How do we wake those people up from here? If what's happened so far hasn't been able to wake them.
In order to respond to that question, Gary, I'd like to relate something that's going on here in Alberta.
Sure.
We are pissed about the relationship with Ottawa, extorting money, preventing our oil getting to market, etc., etc., etc. And there's a vibrant and growing independence movement. Now, in my opinion, the best way to awake the public is not to give them information. I think that we've it's beating a dead horse. We tried. We don't have the control of the media, right?
Mhm.
No. The best way is different. It's the old solution for everything. Money, money.
Yes.
You put money on the table for the average family that's struggling, and suddenly they have options. Now that's the interesting thing. They have options. In particular, the woman has options. Yes, you can pursue a career. I'd strongly encourage it. Our daughter has a double PhD at Oxford, Cambridge. I mean, I get it. I'm for it. Go for it. But for the average woman who's not on a career track, who's a cashier at Walmart, if you were to say to her, look, you know what? If we were independent here, if we were so prosperous with the reduced taxes that you wouldn't have to work, you could actually stay at home and fulfill that much more important role than any man does of being the center person in the family, reigniting that important concept of a real family. Um, Children getting homeschooled, perhaps, drug addiction being more monitored, access to the internet, etc., etc. Women hold the key for the future of democracy. They have they're totally unaware of their power. They've been led astray by the feminists. But what a wonderful time that would be to go back to pre-World War II situation where most women were very happy as homemakers. And give the progressive economic decline in the West, they have been incrementally forced to work.
Are
We
you
could change that.
in terms of just, I mean, how specifically, how could you change that? I know you talked about money, but in terms of, could you specify how that would work?
Yes, I mean, Doge in the States, Musk's operation
Mm.
is the classic example. Government's got to be brought down to its knees in terms of how it spends the hard-earned tax money of the population. I think it's similar in Britain as it is in Canada, where totally we spend 45 to 48% of our typical family's income on taxes when you add them all up together. We're working half our lives for government to squander our money. That information needs to get out there. They need to be brought down to their knees. There needs to be massive reduction in government spending because there was a famous US political economist, Stein was his name, who said, if something can't go on forever, it will stop. Government is a Ponzi scheme for which you and I and Bernie Madoff would go to jail.
Yes.
A Ponzi scheme, for people that I need to translate that into government language, a Ponzi scheme is when you borrow money to pay the interest on the money you've borrowed.
Yeah.
That has to stop. So hopefully before there's an economic Armageddon. But the point I'm making is these problems are solvable. It just needs people to be aware of the potential for a radical change in democracy. Democracy, I'm not talking about any authoritarian state here.
Mm.
A freewheeling democracy with entrepreneurship and government exiting the situation, except for important things such as safety, defense, and so on. Then we have a glorious future.
How much or how much of a step closer to that do you think we are with one, um, the inauguration of Donald Trump, and two, the stepping down of Justin Trudeau?
The child emperor, you mean?
That's the one.
I have other names for him that are slanderous. Well, he's done. You know, that congenital clown. I mean, he's you know the way he ran government. He would actually have a séance every night with his stepdad. It was his stepfather, of course. He'd have a séance every night to say, "Hey, Dad, what should I do tomorrow?" And Dad would say, "Oh, Justin, just do what I do. Just do it. Just do it." And the guy's got nothing between the ears. He's driven this country into the ground, and his replacement's not going to be much better. So I'm not having any holding up any hopes for Canada. That's why I'm a staunch advocate for independence as potentially a small demonstration project of institutions you can control that shows the world how we can actually reinvent democracy along the lines that I said.
But what about I mean, the the other side of that coin, if you like? And when I mentioned Donald Trump, and before earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that he had made a mistake once. Is there confidence that he is going to rectify those mistakes or not make any more in his second term?
I think so. You know, I have certain addictions, and one is to Fox News. So I'm much more interested in American politics than I am Canadian. I follow it acutely. Um, Trump is introducing a sea change in how democracy operates. It's a populist movement. It's nothing to do with rich Republicans anymore. It's appealing to the general public. And given the speed with what's happening just in the first 2 weeks, it bodes so well for America. They are going to, I suspect it's going to be a Republican dynasty for the next 10, 20 years. The Democratic Party is rubbing itself out. It no longer represents the poor. It represents Hollywood and the billionaire class. It's an East and West attempt to control the states. No, they failed. And Trump is going to be a monumental historic figure. He's going to be on Rushmore. And I can't wait. I can't, I mean, every day is something more dramatic than the day before. And, you know, he's basically firing all the CIA and cherry picking who comes back. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful.
What do you think of his decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization? Yes.
You saw the latest news. Millet and Maloney are both following.
Yes.
Um, that corrupt organization is on the skids, and it's taken far too long for people to realize it. No, Trump's going to have massive international consequences way beyond his own border.
Do you think then that his effect will lead to more accountability to some of the situations that we were discussing earlier on in terms of, well, the mRNA vaccines that have caused
No,
millions of
no,
harms and deaths?
no. We tried to get to him during the campaign about the big mea culpa, and the word that came back was, and I'm just going to quote the words. Okay, it's not me talking; it's Trump talking. why would I cut off half my dick if I'm winning?
Right.
So he backed himself into a corner. He's never going to apologize. One of the most interesting things about the campaign was neither side chose to make the vaccine an issue. They were, it was basically silent. Yes, there'll be hand-wringing about reinstating people who've been fired with back pay and all that sort of mealy-mouthed stuff. But they're not, even with Kennedy, if he gets appointed, even with Kennedy, there's silence. I think that the thing about Kennedy, in my opinion, is this. On the one hand, you've got Trump, and more importantly, Susan Wiles, the chief of staff, who was the chairman of a company that was lobbying for Big Pharma before the election. She's the guardian of the gate. So you got those two um, wanting to be quiet, and then you have the sudden emergence of Kennedy and Bhattacharya on the other side. Now, I know Jay. Um, I admire him deeply, but he's not doesn't have gonads.
Okay.
I wouldn't rely on Jay to support Kennedy because Kennedy has a choice. Do I prostitute myself or do I quit? And I think he's going to prostitute himself and dress it up in the greater good of, you know, food, healthy Americans, chronic disease. He might go down the autism vaccination path because that's not really related to COVID. He might get away with that, but it's going to be a very interesting dynamic there internally. We'll never hear the full story about who's going to win that argument. But I doubt very much that Kennedy's going to win that one.
So, what do we expect it to do with the current situation then, with the deaths from the vaccine that have already occurred and those that are still going to occur? I mean, there are people that have taken it and
Yeah.
are likely to still drop down dead in the coming months or years.
Mhm.
Are we expected just to brush that under the carpet and say, well, there's nothing we can do about that now? What, what
Well, there will come a tipping point. I'm not sure when that's going to be. It would probably be beyond Trump's 4-year term, I would suspect. Um, so many other things going on. I mean, look, most people are fed up with COVID, right? I mean, it's just boring, right? I've got other things to do. Um, can I get on with my life now? They don't want to be told that they have a low risk. It's got to be seen in context. They have a low individual risk of death and consequences. They feel fine. Um, so for most, I've been in the freedom movement now for 5 years, and I can tell you that the average person doesn't give a damn about it. Um, it's it's over. Um, and much more important is, can I get home to watch Netflix now and have a joint? Um, you know, uh, you know, people will trade off incremental loss of freedom for a trinket,
Yes.
some convenience. Um, I have another addiction. I like to have a coffee at McDonald's on the way home. And you've probably seen it. There's a car in front of you, and it's tap and go, tap and go, tap and go. Don't they realize that that's the entry for digital currency? Convenience. McDonald's would love it. You don't have to handle cash anymore. Um, yeah, so no, the average person um, just thinks COVID's in the rearview mirror, and you know, but the evidence will be growing, and I'd like to, in that particular context, Gary, I'd like to mention some of terrible things that could happen in the future
Sure.
that we're trying to quantify.
Yeah.
Um, the first one is that one of the principal, we call it pathophysiologic, one of the principal mechanisms by which the vax, it never was a vaccine, of course, one of the principal mechanisms by which it exerts its action is creating clotting in capillaries, the very small blood vessels that supply all our organs. Now, if you clot off a capillary, the cells that that capillary um, uh, looks after with oxygen and glucose, those cells will die. Now, in organs that can regenerate, like the liver and the kidney, that's okay. But in organs that don't regenerate, like the brain and the heart, that's not okay. Because those cells, you may not miss them immediately because you've got lots left. But when you get to my age, you rely upon that reserve to delay the onset of dementia and heart failure. So we're predicting a tsunami of dementia and heart failure over the next 10, 20 years.
Right.
In a system that's already decomposing. The healthcare system in Britain and elsewhere is massively underfunded. And it will suddenly have to look after a lot of people with very demanding needs. So that's one thing. Then you have turbo cancers that you might have heard about.
Absolutely.
Turbo cancers are real. They're not stopping. They are affecting younger people very aggressively, late presentations, resistant to treatment, etc., etc. Turbo cancers are cancer is increasing, and it's synchronous with the institution after the expected delay of a year or two after the vax. The turbo cancers are increasing. Again, an additional stress on the healthcare system. As if that isn't bad enough, the big problem is currently being worked on, and it's what you might have heard of as reverse transcription. Reverse transcription is looking at whether or not the mRNA in the vax gets inserted into our DNA in the nucleus of our cells. The significance of that is that it is, if that's shown to be the case, and I believe it's highly likely, as I'll tell you in a minute, the significance of that is it is a transgenerational, forever change in the human genome, with consequences that we cannot predict because we don't know how frequent it is, we don't know where it's inserting, what genes it's next to, what genes it's encouraging or suppressing. We haven't, at this point, first of all, we have to show it's happening, and I'll tell you the evidence for that in a minute. But we wouldn't have a clue what it's going to do. Now, when that research gets published, and I know the two principal actors internationally, David Speaker, a Canadian virologist, and Kevin McKernan in the States.
Yeah. Yeah.
When that gets published, watch out, politicians. The revulsion of the population to know that they've been changed and their children changed potentially forever and ever. Amen. The revulsion that's going to happen is unimaginable, and the consequences of it, all for the most trivial of reasons, namely, essentially a cold.
Well,
that is going to be incredible. Now, just to finish one thing, why am I confident that that's going to be demonstrated? Well, first of all, 8% of our genome is viral in origin. In our evolutionary history, viruses have found a way of getting their DNA inserted into our DNA. We know that for a fact. The second thing is that two independent research teams, one at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a powerhouse of intellect, and the University of Lund in Sweden, They both demonstrated independently in petri dishes that the the mRNA in the vax, did incorporate into the nucleus of the cells in the petri dish. Independent confirmation. What remains to be seen is if it's happening in vivo. And David Speaker is working with spermatozoa because they are produced in the testes, a rapidly dividing cell line, which makes it easier to demonstrate reverse transcription. So yeah, that's extraordinarily worrying
Well,
for the
Roger,
future of the human race.
it is. And I know that you said earlier that you're not a conspiracy theorist, but can you honestly say that this jab was put together like that for just the equivalent of a cold? It sounds to me like it was put together deliberately for, say, a depopulation agenda, deliberately to maim and injure and kill large swaths of the human race.
Maybe I'm just too traditional a doc, and maybe I I just can't believe that someone would be so Machiavellian in intent to try and do that. But on a more pragmatic, a more logical reaction to that would be they wouldn't have had a clue. They wouldn't have had a clue what this was actually going to do or could do. They just wanted to do it as a trial run to protect the population against a real bioweapon. It was it was an urgent, let's do it, damn the torpedoes, um, series of actions that we know now had terrible consequences. But I'd like to think that it was not deliberate.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it just sounds to me like someone with that much knowledge to put together such an intricate vaccine or jab or whatever you want to call it cannot have possibly not known the
Well,
consequences.
um, uh, I don't have the highest regard for Robert Malone,
Right.
but I think he's deep state. But anyway, he did say something some time ago that I'd heard for the first time, and I think it has real merit. Um, he talked about dual function research. Now, dual function research is a military term to encourage, on the one hand, gain of function research in the fatuous idea that by making a bug more pathogenic, more infectious, more fatal, that by doing that you can somehow design ways to counter it um, with mRNA vaccines. And so you want to maintain what Malone calls warm manufacturing capability. What that means is you want to have an instant reaction to a real bioterrorism attack so that you can develop the vaccine in warp speed, if I could use a pun, and use it on your front line, your police, your army. It's going to kill a lot of them. Yes, it's sad. That's the nature of war. But enough of them would survive to defend you and to maintain domestic peace, marauding bands of vigilantes and so on. That's the purpose of dual function research. It's absolutely mad because you can never predict how infectious a particular creation in a test tube is going to be. But it is necessary. It's not rocket science to develop these new organisms. The only saving grace is it's extraordinarily difficult to create a pathogen, a new pathogen, or a version of an old pathogen that is simultaneously transmissible and lethal. Usually, if it's very lethal, it burns itself out locally and it's not transmitted. Um, viruses like to, if you think of them having a brain, they like to survive, right? They don't want to exterminate themselves.
Do you think that you mentioned that they were trying to protect against a real bioweapon? Is there likely to be a real bioweapon released on the population?
No, I think as I said, it's highly, highly unlikely because it's hard to have those two principal characteristics in a new organism. Highly lethal and very transmissible. It's very difficult to create. Look at Ebola. It's not that easily transmissible. It's lethal. Um, Look at the common cold. It's easily transmissible, but it's not lethal. I've got one right now, and I'm still talking to you.
Is there any worry though about the mRNA technology being used in a so-called cancer vaccine? Something I've been
No,
hearing
not a
recently.
chance. Not in not in our lifetime or our kids' lifetime. I know a little bit about cancer because of I'm chairman of an American biotech company involved in DNA sequencing.
Nice.
Very, very exciting area.
Mm.
Um, what people need to realize about cancer is by the time it's diagnosed, it's not a cancer. It's probably 1,000 different little cancers, all in the same lump, because with each progressive multiplication of the original cancer cell, it continues to mutate. And so you think of it as a branching tree. You've got dichotomous branching with many, many different versions, maybe a dominant version because it's been more successful at dividing. And so that's what gets knocked off with chemotherapy. You've heard the story, it looks like we've licked it, and then because it disappears on X-ray and imaging, um, but then it comes back.
Mm.
Well, the reason cancer comes back is very simple. It's because of all those other clones, as we call it, those other versions that are not going to respond to the chemotherapy. And they lurk around and damn it, they come back. Um, that's the reality of cancer, and that's why it's terribly important. Um, Future of oncology. The future of oncology really, if it's going to improve survival, demands um, the diagnosis of cancer at a very, very early stage when you don't know you've got it. It hasn't had a chance to metastasize. And more importantly, there's more homogeneity. The cells are more likely to be relatively similar to each other. Um, and so if you can diagnose the cancer at that very early stage on a blood test, it's called the liquid biopsy. It's simply a blood sample in which you look for the the mutations of that cancer you don't know you got. You look for the very, very low concentration of those mutations in the blood. And if you monitor that and you could sure about it, you see that it's doubling over time and it looks like it really is a cancer. You still feel perfectly well. That's the point at which you can jump in with a specific drug for that particular dominant mutation. You then monitor the concentration of that mutation with time to see it dropping. And bingo, you've been cured of the cancer you didn't know you had. That that is the future of oncology, and it's a terribly exciting area. The biggest thing is you have to be sure of what you're telling the patient because you don't want to be wrong.
Sure.
Having the worried well and exposing them to chemotherapy unnecessarily. So that's going to be a terribly exciting area of cancer research, and we're our company in North Carolina, we're right in the middle of that.
Roger, one thing we haven't touched on, it's a slightly changed tack in that I wanted to ask you about the role of the World Economic Forum in everything
Hmm.
that's happened since that November 13th, 2020 statement. What's your view on them, their motives, their role in everything that's gone on?
Essentially the motivation of the WEF and WHO is to make the West feel so guilty about its success that it sends a lot of money to countries which are much poorer. It, that's the essential motivation, and of course they're trying to use climate change as one of the ways to convince people that that's appropriate. We are killing the planet, and we need to make sure that we stop doing that. And the only way to do it, of course, is to make us impoverished like everywhere else. And obviously that's failing. But stealth attack, though, that stealth attack was incredibly successful. I mean, they're now out in the open, declared as what their real motivation is. But Soros's uh, plan was very successful to infiltrate universities and the cabinets and secretariats of the Western countries. I mean, he created a cohort of people that believed in in how terrible we've been in the past and how we must do everything to rectify it. Um, and he boasts about how many people at the cabinet table in Ottawa he trained to deliver that message under the table. Well, we finally figured you out. And now we can do something about it. How many people are aware that 90% of junior faculty in universities are socialists or closet communists, a self-perpetuating elite that we pay for to eat us alive because they train the teachers, and the teachers go to the schools and deliver the same message to the kids. And the kids go to university or colleges and get a second dose. Oh, it must be right. Not only that, but if you want to succeed in a career, you better drink the Kool-Aid. And that's been happening for decades. And we didn't know it was happening. And look what the result has been.
Well, I mean, Trump is calling out the climate change. He calls it the hoax. I don't know if you feel the same way about human.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Well, in the UK, we're in overdrive of how we've got to change the way everybody lives in order to change the planet. If COVID was the big danger of the last 4 years, is climate change the next thing that we need to be wary of? Not in terms
Well,
of we need to change to save the planet, but in terms of the madness behind the policies being thrown at us.
I mean, just despite all the terrible things that happened with COVID and the excess deaths and the future of reverse transcription, et cetera, um, it revealed the corruption of institutions. One of which, of course, one concept coming out of those institutions is the climate hoax, and the climate hoax has now been revealed as a hoax. In my opinion, there may be a very small contribution of human activity to global temperature, but even that is questionable. It's basically something that's happened over millennia. Temperature changes. And the biggest driver, of course, of global temperature, if you can measure it at all, how do you average the temperature of the entire world? I mean, that's a fatuous concept in the first place. But I mean, all you have to really do to understand climate change, you don't have to know the science. You just have to look out of the window. And
Yes.
and what do you see there? You see clouds. And guess what? Clouds change erratically. The meteorologists can't predict them from one day to the next, let alone next year. The clouds change. It's all cloud driven. And the clouds are driven by the intersection of two variables: the strength of the magnetic storm coming out of the sun, interacting with, which is a variable, interacting with the variable cosmic rays coming from supernova. And they interact in our upper atmosphere and create the nuclei for condensation of water vapor that eventually become clouds. So you're dealing with two independently variable physical activities over which we have absolutely no control: the sun and supernova, and we get a thing called clouds. And they cover the earth, and you can't predict where they're going to be and what they're going to be tomorrow. For God's sake, get a grip on yourself, learn to live with it, accommodate. Way too many people die of cold than ever die of heat. And you just got to accommodate and stop this pathetic expectation that you can change something with so many variables that's been going on for billions of years. As per the Vostok ice core, temperatures have gone up and down dramatically before anyone invented the internal combustion engine. Carbon dioxide, Patrick Moore, the ex-founder of Greenpeace, said prophetically, carbon dioxide is not a poison, it's our savior, because it's called plant food. And if the plants die, we die.
Well, I mean, I wish someone would explain that type of common sense to the British government, because they are in absolute overdrive over net zero and climate change and sustainable development goals, etc., etc. Yes.
Absolutely bonkers.
Well, Roger, as we kind of wrap things up, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to talk about?
Well, it's been a great chat. We could drill down again. I'd love to have another conversation with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's there's so many facets to what we talked about that you know people might be interested in. I would like to say just one final thing. Actually, I was having a shower this morning, and I thought, thinking about what I was going to say. Just a final thought. It's just a detailed scientific comment. There are two forms of genetic material. There's DNA that you all know about. It's in our genes. It varies from person to person. That's why you look different from me, Gary. Our genes are different. DNA. But RNA, when it's in a virus like COVID or other viruses, if it's an RNA virus, please listen to me. It changes spontaneously all the time. You can't control those changes. You can't anticipate the changes. The vaccine for the flu this year is for last year's version. It doesn't work. They're always, it's always, an RNA virus is always 10 steps ahead of you. You cannot, underlined in neon, control an RNA virus, period. Don't even think about it. It's everywhere all the time. Get used to it, accommodate to it. Don't try and control it. The bird flu episode is another example of that. Killing all these chickens. You've just got to let it rip. You gotta let it rip and do nothing. Nothing. The hardest thing in medicine is to do nothing. You just gotta let an RNA virus rip. And you then get a wonderful thing called herd immunity. So that next time you get exposed to it or something similar, your body can react, and so can the chickens. So leave them alone. They'll do just fine.
Roger, that's a fantastic message to end on. So, I mean, thanks again. You've been a wonderful guest. Lots of great stories and information. Always appreciated. And I look forward to speaking to you again sometime in the future.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.